My name is Marg Simons, and I've been a member of the Ometepe-Gulf Island Friendship Association ever since it started. Now, I'd really like to tell you how it started. Ron Pither from Main Island and George Harris from Galiano Island went down to Nicaragua, and the war was still on at that time, and this would be December of 1987. And they visited Ometepe, and they met a mayor of one of the communities, Altagracia. It's the biggest community on the island. And they asked him what their most pressing need was on the island. And he said, potable water. The infrastructure of the whole country had broken down. The American blockade had really taken a great toll on the country. So on Ometepe, the pipes were all broken, needed repairing. The generator wasn't operating. They had a little generator in the hospital, and that was the only one on the island. And they were really in quite a bad state. They realized the need of the water was the most important thing. And they came back to Canada and decided that they'd like to make it known. Well, Ron Pither doesn't waste any time. He phoned the ambassador to Canada from Nicaragua and asked him if he would like to come and meet the people in the Gulf Islands. And he said, oh, yes, I guess maybe the best time would be when your member of parliament is next going to be there. And so he got together with our member of parliament at the time, and they arranged to come. That's when Ron Pither phoned me and said, can you help me? The ambassador is going to be coming to Salt Spring Island. I had no idea I'd been to Nicaragua or what the whole story was about. And so I said, well, what help do you need? And he said, well, the ambassador is coming next Sunday. Well, he said, we'll have to have something in the newspaper. Well, we had about 1 day to get it in the newspaper that this was happening. And he said, and we will need to have a place to have it. So could you organize that? We've got about 5 different groups in the island that were willing to help with this. They were all social justice groups or church groups. And so we got a little ad in the paper. And by the day of the event, the church basement was just packed. And so the ambassador was very, very surprised. He gave his talk, and we discovered that all sorts of other things were going on. Like there's a group of Americans in Bainbridge Island, and they're also twinned with this island, Ometepe. And so they were invited to come too. Ron really put himself right in the middle of things and said, we're having the ambassador, come on and meet him. It was decided that we'd have a potluck supper. So when the potluck supper happened, he got up and gave a little speech, and he said, I've never been entertained like this before. In Ottawa, a few people might turn out if I'm going to be giving a talk, but here in Salt Spring, this is absolutely amazing. And so the plan was then that the next day he would go to Main Island, where Ron is from, and the following day they would go on to Galiano Island, where George is from. And so that was his visit. And from then on, there were teas and there were auctions and luncheons, just all sorts of ways of trying to raise money. And then one very kind gentleman said he would like to give $10,000. So this was a lovely beginning. And we went to Save the Children Fund and asked them if they would be interested in taking part in this program, bringing water to Ometepe Island in Nicaragua, and they were very interested in helping with it. And so they said if we could raise a little more money, then come back to them, we could make an application and they would double the amount of money. So we raised $12,500 and they did the same. And then they went to CETA. And at that point, CETA was into water projects. The communities were all, of course, the water was going to be for them, and they were really wanting to take part in it. So our friendship grew because of this. And many of us visited the island. And I guess that's the way we started our friendship.
Cambiar tu fe, la prueba yo te doy, él me ha cambiado a mí.
Ometepe Island in Lake Nicaragua was twinned in friendship with Canadian Gulf Islands in 1987-88, late 80s, by spurred on by a visit by myself and George Harris from Galiano to look at possibilities of doing projects under somewhat of a theme of sustainability. So we went to Ometepe, which is called the Island of Peace often by Nicaraguans, and it had not really suffered from any physical war action, but there had been some light skirmishes. Essentially it was a island reserve in a natural reserve. It was legally a park, supposed to be part of the patrimony of Nicaragua, and we met with, at that time, the mayor was a Sandinista appointed functionary of the Sandinista party who had successfully overthrown a dictator called Somoza, and they named their party after a national hero called Sandino. So we tried to not be political and to just look at what we could do in friendship and high spirits and some high ideals, I guess. And we knew that there were problems with water. Drinking water was a problem, and waste disposal, wastewater, and health issues, all tied into water. Water's pretty basic. So we went back to Canada, to the Gulf Islands, and managed to inspire a lot of activity in support of Ometepe and community building, water systems, community water systems, revamping the electrical and water systems. And in doing the potable water assessment, the water comes down from Ometepe's two hills, which are basically two volcanoes. One is alive and it's always smoking, and the other one is dormant. It has a lake at the top. And it was the more rural and physically disadvantaged part of the island. They didn't have much in the way of social services, transportation, but there was a beautiful tropical forest canopy which protected the watershed, but it was being intruded upon by illegal timber cutting and by people settling on the island and moving up the slopes. The other part of the island, the north end, which has got the active volcano, had been seriously denuded. It had electricity around the perimeter of the island cone, the northern active volcanic cone, and so we worked there initially with their infrastructure. We said, well, we're here to work with you, and so we put in typical pipes and pumps and refurbished from electric to diesel and from diesel to electric. But we really wanted to do gravity-fed water systems and protect the watershed. And so the dug wells were expensive, and sometimes you ran into huge technical problems with the volcanic mantle, trying to pierce that to get to the aquifer. Ran into problems in areas with just wastewater contaminating and poor maintenance because they were in a war. The American government had supplied what were called the Contras, and the Contras were destabilizing the country seriously with military and economic warfare, economic sabotage, taking the coffee, hijacking the coffee beans. Coffee was the largest generator of income for the country, and actually coffee is the second most valuable crop in the world. And we looked at the watershed, and there was coffee planted up in there, and we went, hey, don't cut the watershed. That's going to be affecting the water, your drinking water, but also there's coffee there, and we'll buy the coffee. And we were working with another sister island organization from the Seattle area, Bainbridge Island, and Bainbridge was doing projects as well, and we began to cooperate with them on co-funding some of the education and the drinking water systems that were gravity fed and rural capacity building. We were building as much as we could with the limited funds we had, and we realized that the coffee could become an economic mule or economic engine for our efforts, and that the community of Ometepe could principally decide where that money would be spent. So we began to pay a premium for the coffee. I worked with the growers on organic training, production methodology, and organic certification, and organic inspection. And it was good because they said, well, why should we go through all this? You're always going to buy our coffee, and hey, it's a non-profit. I said, we could be gone tomorrow, and then you would have to relate to the vagaries or the realities of the market, of the coffee market. And so we became what I guess you could call a bit of an enterprising non-profit. And non-profits have to learn that, to be more enterprising, self-financing as much as possible, to have money that you could maybe take to other partners or guilt other possible funders by having talk money. And we actually raised a lot of serious money so that we've been somewhat independent, or it's the Ometepe-Gulf Islands Friendship Association. And George came back from Nicaragua and Ometepe, so inspired by what he seen, he said, I got to take my kids down. And you know what? We should just give them a camera and we can see these things through the eyes of children. So he had 3 boys and a partner and an old motorhome, and they got in that and went all the way through Nicaragua and El Salvador and Mexico and into Nicaragua and Costa Rica. I got some money from the BC Teachers Federation to fund the film costs, and we schmoozed our way into JVC Canada and got a camera. We said we were going to jungle test. We didn't say the word Nicaragua. That was a wrong thing to say those days. And because it was Sandinistas, there'd been a revolution there that was going on in the north. It was a brutal, brutal time. So, yeah, so it worked out really well. We were able to then begin to learn from them. And we learned a lot.
Puede cambiar tu ser. La prueba yo te doy. Puede cambiar tu ser.
My name is Andy Gibson. I live on Salt Spring Island. I'm a member of the Ometepe-Gulf Islands Friendship Association and have been a member of it since its inception. The Ometepe-Gulf Islands Friendship Association was formed in the late 1980s to assist the people of Ometepe Island who had had a difficult period previously because of the political unrest and had a severe shortage of many of what we would think is the basics of life. My wife and I made our first trip to Nicaragua in 1985 because we were appalled by what was happening. We went through the aegis of the Tools for Peace campaign, which was endeavoring to assist the people of Nicaragua. We saw all of Managua. We went out into the hinterland of Nicaragua, and we saw a great deal of what enormous horrible things were being done by Reagan's Contras over in the countryside. The people, we found burned out vehicles. We found, in one case, we found a church that had been vandalized and the congregation killed. We saw all kinds of evidence of their rapacity and their cruelty and their destruction. It became quite a defining moment in our time because we had been moderately, we believed that these Sandinistas were a much more attractive organization than anything else that they have down there, but now we saw what they were up against. We saw terrible scenes of destruction, vandalism, cruelty, and it would leave anybody adamant to do to assist the Nicaraguan people. 3 years later, in 1988, we came back, and at this time, the OGIFA had been formed. And we were charged with the responsibility of getting parts for the for the electrical systems and water systems. Ometepe was suffering from the most grievous of misfortunes because it had a functioning hospital, it had a functioning power plant, but the Reagan policy involved stopping them from getting spare parts. For the water system and the electrical system was slowly going out of commission. There was sometimes no water at the hospital. There was some mortality. It was really a deplorable situation that Ometepe was in. For instance, the place where all the cattle had to be watered at the lake, and in many cases that was the only water that was available for people, unless many of the familiar sight on all the roads of Ometepe was children with wagons. So there might possibly be a donkey, but not very often. Almost always it was children with little wagons or people carrying water, and they had to go for miles to get it and come back. And it was obvious that that wasn't in the larger centers, but it was in the smaller ones. And that was a familiar sight on the roads, which kind of broke your heart when you realized that there was water available on Ometepe if only we could get the piping for it, and which we did get. And then an enormous project, which is continuing to this day, is to maintain the water system for Ometepe, because the source of the water is high on the slopes of the the volcano, and it had to be piped down, so that there was a big influx of pipes coming down, and the water and power systems were finally operating as they should. The big problem we had at that time was to get some kind of income going on Ometepe, and the one that naturally was recurred to us was coffee, because the Ometepans had they grew wonderful coffee, but there was next to no people buying it, and they were subjected to the coyotes, I believe they call them, which were coffee purchasers that would go from farm to farm and buy at rock bottom prices the coffee. And yet the coffee was excellent coffee. And I can remember going down across the border to the warehouse and picking up in our little Toyota bags of coffee, which we had imported, and then we took them up to be ground. And then, of course, after that, we began selling it, or many other places, and so the whole thing has been the amount of the money generated by it, with grants that came from Canadian sources, has topped, and I haven't got the exact figure or any figure, but it's just been enormous. And so many organizations have benefited by it. The members of our organization are people in all walks of life, but they have, I believe, a heightened social conscience. That is to say, they get their pleasure. It's a very rewarding thing, because they get their pleasure out of doing efficient, valuable things for their fellow man. It's as simple as that. And but there are many tribulations on the way, and many times the projects that may be initiated don't work out. They simply have to be dropped, or they can even, in extreme circumstances, totally fail. So a great deal of thought has to be lavished on it. One thing that is going for all these organizations is that the people that are running them know exactly what they're doing, and they get their pleasure in life from doing this valuable work, and wouldn't feel complete citizens without doing that.
Puede cambiar tu ser. La prueba yo te doy. Él me ha cambiado a mí. Puede cambiar tu ser. La prueba yo te doy. Él me ha cambiado a mí.
The children that Dr. Saul helps, or the home for the boys that Jonathan does, I think we as a group feel was more important.
Janice, have they always received that same amount
Yes.
each year? Why
Yes.
was that amount?
12,000
Yeah,
every
it's a
year for
big
many
chunk of
years.
money.
Yeah, there's such a big chunk down there. So that might be one place we could cut back. And if we're going to do that, we should do it as soon as possible, so that CODEB knows in advance, and they might be able to find other group that could fill in that sum that we cut out. I've been a member of the OGIFA Ometepe-Gulf Islands Friendship Association for 14 years. For 10 of those, I was treasurer, and the last 3 I've been vice president. And I've somehow kind of slipped into being an amateur designer and do the labels and any signs that we need, or any kind of artwork that can be done on a computer. That's fun for me. My husband and I became involved with OGIFA after we lived on Salt Spring for a number of years and had been drinking this delicious coffee for a while. The group that we belonged to, Tools for Peace, and then CASC, the Central American Support Committee, both had sort of dissolved, weren't functioning much anymore. So we decided that we would put our efforts into working with the OGIFA people. When Brian and I joined the group in the mid-90s, they'd had their nonprofit status for about 10 years and had been raising funds, or had been accumulating funds in various ways, and they had finally started purchasing green coffee beans from the farmers on Ometepe Island, but didn't have a lot of funds, so they were having to purchase them in small lots, and this meant driving to Bainbridge Island in Washington to pick up a couple of bags of beans from a sister organization who was also working and helping out the people of Ometepe Island. And so every couple of months there would be somebody drive down, pick up a couple of bags of 150-pound bags of green beans, and then drive them back across the border. I think we should be really grateful that we're not having to do that now, considering the fear and suspicion that we're living with these days. When this particular group got started, they were working very closely with the group on Bainbridge Island, BOSIA, that's Bainbridge Ometepe Sister Island Association, and knew the people in BOSIA and vice versa. And now that we're not having to make these regular trips to pick up the green beans or work with them on projects, which we did in the past, we've kind of lost touch with them, which in a way is a shame, because it was one of the nice things about this particular group, in that we had a connection to another country and a third one involved with us. When I assumed the position of treasurer in 1996, the group was still financially on a rocky basis, and because we weren't supporting any projects on other than just a temporary basis, nobody expected any particular sum each year, I suggested that we not make any donations for a year to accumulate enough funds that we would be able to buy a year's supply of green beans all at once. And doing that, we no longer had to borrow money from the members, so there was no interest payments, and we were able to save the funds of driving back and forth as well. And along with a sudden interest in our coffee, it seemed to change suddenly. Our income increased. Once we were able to buy the beans a whole year's supply at a time, we just started to really go from there, and we're doing extremely well. Good times. We have eventually ended up with a roaster who stored our beans for very little and roasted our beans at a lower cost, I think, I'm pretty sure, than for any other group. They basically are supporting us. That's Serious Coffee out of Duncan, and we're very, very grateful to them for all of their help. We have at times been able to donate as much as $35,000, $40,000 to our projects. We have 4 main projects and a 5th one that it's the only one for which we have any assistance. We're partnered with an NGO in Vancouver called Co-Development Canada, and they match the funds that we donate to a microbank.
Our other 4 projects are ones that we know the coordinator on the ground. We know that this person is a volunteer, so that all of the funds that we donate go directly to the project. There's nothing for administration. And this is sort of an unwritten law with us. We really like to arrange that type of project. As long as OGIFA is in existence and I'm alive and capable, I will be a part of it.
Puede cambiar tu ser. La prueba yo te doy. Puede cambiar tu ser. La prueba
Is there anybody on the south end that we could think of a potential vendor of our...
Yes?
Brian, you could put a little
Oh,
counter
yes.
outside. A farm stand.
There's a coffee shop all right across the road from Patterson's.
Yeah, Morningside Bakery.
Morningside Bakery, and they could be approached as a possible vendor. Our coffee is grown by a co-op who have their finca, which is a farm, their plantation, on the side of a volcano on the southern end of this island. The coffee shrubs are grown, and the cherries, which are little reddish berries, which ripen at various rates in the late autumn, our autumn, and are then picked usually around late November through December, maybe into early January, depending on weather conditions. These little cherries are picked by hand, and the bushes have to be picked over and over and over again because they don't all ripen at the same time. And then bags of these juicy little berries are carried down the mountainside to a processing area in the finca. There the berries are digested, the pulp is removed, and the seeds inside, which are actually the coffee beans, are spread out on large concrete pads where they are sun-dried for 3 or 4 days. They're being turned frequently. Then they're gathered up and they go on to long tables where they're being picked over by mainly women and some children. And they're picked over about 3 times. So all the abnormally formed cherries or coffee beans, I should say, and little sticks and stones and little pieces of concrete are carefully removed. The coffee beans are then bagged. Eventually, they're gathered up and shipped up to a port either in Seattle or Vancouver. And at the present time, our particular group gets about 7,000 or 8,000 pounds a year. These beans are in 152-pound bags. They are nursed through customs, sometimes quickly, sometimes with complications. Sometimes some of the bags are ripped open by customs, and all the beans are dumped on the container floor, which costs us quite a bit of money. But eventually, we get them to a storage area, and from there, they're sent over to our storage facility, which is in Duncan. When we need the coffee, we let the roasting facility in Duncan know what roasting temperatures we want for the beans, and we usually have maybe 200 pounds roasted at a time every 2 or 3 weeks. We go over, pick up the roasted coffee beans, bring them back, put them in bags, and distribute them to our various outlets. The bags are labeled. The labels are made by a group member. They're put on the bags by volunteers. The bags are filled by volunteers, and it's a very low-cost operation. Once we sell the beans, all the monies are gathered together and eventually distributed for a variety of development projects in Central America. In the early days, back in the early 90s, I would say, our main focus of the group was on water distribution projects. And so we funded quite a variety of those. When I say we funded them, basically our funds went to buy the supplies and pay for some of the engineering work, and the local folks did all the work and the installation and so on, and have been looking after those systems ever since. After that was completed, some of our funding went for disaster relief because there was a hurricane that occurred that destroyed a lot of the infrastructure on the island. So some of our monies went to restore roads, to buy gasoline so they could run some of their heavy equipment and that sort of thing. Eventually, we developed other projects, one of which was a women's group which operates both on Ometepe Island and on the adjacent area of the mainland, and it goes under the acronym MEC. Initially, we were funding a microbank for women, which was looked after by this local group of women. And more recently, after the microbank was fully funded to their satisfaction, the funds have gone into conducting workshops for women, teaching them about their rights, teaching them how to run a business, teaching them about politics, and so on. So that's one of the ongoing projects that we still support. Another project in rural Nicaragua, not necessarily Ometepe, is run by Dr. Saul, and what he does is goes into the remote villages and trains health workers to deal with everyday health problems, as well as providing health education to the people. He has a very broad interpretation of health, and so we have funded the purchase of chickens so that people can produce protein and sell eggs and generate revenue that way. We have funded the purchase of sewing machines so that they can make their own clothing and sell clothing. These are all little industries that they can do. And then we have a couple of projects in Nicaragua, one of which is in a Mayan community. And it is basically providing scholarships for Mayan students so that they can pursue their higher education. Another one is for the installation of stoves, because in these remote communities, the traditional way of cooking has been over an open fire in a small house. And the smoke, of course, accumulates in the house. Children fall into the open fire, and there's a number of health problems that come out of that. And our project has been to fund the distribution of materials for a stove called an O'Neill stove, which is a very efficient wood stove, which can be installed in the houses, and all the smoke is vented outside. The stove consumes only about a third of the amount of fuel that an open fire consumes. And so the women who traditionally are the wood gatherers have a lot more time to devote to other things. And so far we've funded 200 or 300 of these stoves. So that's just an overview of where our funds go these days.
Puede cambiar tu fe. La prueba yo te doy. Puede cambiar tu fe.
Okay, so
Well,
let,
if we were to move in that direction, I, for one, would really like to see a resolution that attacks the issue of accountability. I'm not happy to keep on dishing out money to Dr. Saul when we have a pretty firm line of accountability. So I would back your resolution, but there's another one coming from me.
well, we can adjust that. I'm just starting it, so we can, we know it's not supposed to be done that way, but we can do it that way.
Okay, the motion has not been seconded yet.
No, so we
Do
can
you
still
want
adjust
to
it.
change it?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Before you do, don't we need people to look at this over the next month as we look at the money coming in and how much, and then what I'm saying is the committee should look at it.
Well, John, I think my feeling is that we're obviously going to have enough money to send to Ciela Vida and Papatsiak, and they need it ASAP. So I think we should do that.
Why don't you word your motion just
For
to
that?
that effect?
Okay, I could do that.
I've been on Salt Spring for 8 years, 7 of those as a member of OGIFA, the Ometepe-Gulf Islands Friendship Association. And with our sister association on Bainbridge Island, just outside of Seattle, we buy the complete coffee crop from the finca on Ometepe Island, which is a cooperative. Probably membership is around 40 right now. Our priority is to return all of the money to Central America. We sell coffee in the marketplace, and probably each member does 3 or 4 times a year in the marketplace. As well, we've just finished the fall fair on Salt Spring, and we sold about $1,400 worth of coffee at the fall fair. So fair trade, organic, shade-grown coffee. We as well sell decaf coffee from Chiapas in Mexico. And even our sugar is fair trade, organic sugar. We probably sell $500 to $600 of coffee on a Saturday morning. It can be a cup of coffee at $1.50, or it can be a pound of coffee at $12.50. It's not hard to sell coffee. It's fun to do because you get the chance to meet your community, and returning the money to Central America makes you feel like you're part of a sustainable world. I'll describe one of the projects there that we probably fund about $7,000 a year for. It's called Ciela Vida, and it's run by a gentleman named Jonathan Roisey, a Quaker by faith who really believes in volunteering and making the world a better place. Jonathan and his group take kids from the streets of Managua, most of whom are glue sniffers. If the kid can get off the glue, stop his addiction, then they're taken to Ometepe Island to a plantation where they learn simple skills like computing, farm skills. They're enrolled in local schools, and they've got several success stories where the kids have gone on to higher education and actually have returned to help the group. As well, we fund a local doctor in Nicaragua, Dr. Saul Contreras, and he almost runs a paramedical group. He obtains medicines reasonably and returns those to the backcountry where there are no other medical supplies or aid. And he also trains locals to work on this project. Other projects include a stove project. This is a stove that is a much more intense burning stove, very simple concrete block construction, but it's much safer than the open fire pit a lot of Guatemalan families would use. And MEC is a project where women fund other women in small projects. They pay back, and their payback is used to fund new women in the group. So there are lots of projects that we do. The projects have very little infrastructure payments in them. They're all nonprofit, and we feel the money goes directly to the people that should be using it.
Puede cambiar tu ser. La prueba yo te doy. Puede cambiar tu ser. La prueba yo te doy.
Our obligation to seal me down and
Él me ha cambiado a mí.
get done with emails as soon as possible.
No ves que soy feliz.
Seconder? All in favor? Okay, carried.
We should bring in at least 19,000, and I'm thinking with that, the 6,400 that, at the beginning of March, that Serious Coffee will pay us for the beans they're going to receive from us this year, or maybe more.
My name is Margaret O'Hara, and I first heard about the Ometepe-Gulf Island Friendship Association group, the OGIFA group, in 1999, just about 6 months after we moved here. We live in a little village here in Salt Springs, so we got to know our neighbors a lot, and we met Art and Marg Simons, who are founders of the group, soon after we moved here, and they were telling us about all the different things on Salt Spring, and one of the organizations that they were enthusiastic about was the OGIFA group. And it turned out that in 1999 there was a meeting between OGIFA here on Salt Spring and the sister group that they work with, the Bainbridge Ometepe Sister Island Association, BOSIA. They all came up, and we were invited to this feast and slideshow and get together and chatting with everyone, and we were lucky to get that firsthand, all the information about what these groups were doing and what why people on Salt Spring were doing it, and it felt like it touched something in us. It felt like that would be a way to connect with Salt Spring, with the folks that would be that would be interesting to chat with, and also just for myself, it was trying to do something beyond what I know is our privileged position in this country, and in what our circumstances were. We were in a beautiful place. We were doing fine and having all the needs and some luxuries too. That I knew that wasn't the case in many parts of the world. When I was a teenager, I spent a year in Brazil as part of an exchange program, and that was the first awakening. I know that. I know that time there was the first awakening for me, that there are places where basic needs aren't being met, and so this seemed to be basic needs aren't being met. There's a real gap between the privileged and those who for many reasons aren't even having those basic needs, such as water, which is where the project's efforts first began, was providing just a system of water for a community, something that we take for granted, and we leave the tap running. And Salt Springs is a place where your consciousness is raised in many ways. You meet people that are astounding with their backgrounds and what they've done and their experiences, and you make links with what you have inside yourself. And so the OGIFA group was a perfect opportunity to just feel like you can contribute a little bit. In my role as treasurer for Ometepe-Gulf Island Friendship Association, I get to look at all the income that comes in. I get to look at the expenses that go out. The income is mainly from our market sales on Salt Spring Island, and also our wholesale sales to different organizations that support our groups. So that's different stores on Salt Spring and some in Victoria, and then many individuals who order beans directly from us. So that's where the income comes from. So the way that it works is we're joined with the Bainbridge group that I mentioned earlier, Bosia, and they get a sense of what the crop is, and it's typically around the same, I don't know what the numbers are, but it's typically, you know, based on what the acreage is, and so it's more or less the same amount every year. They say, okay, so your portion is going to be this amount, and they take a portion, and I think there's another group or two that takes another portion, but the Bainbridge group and our group on Salt Spring receive the majority of the share of the beans. We pay 3 times. We pay a prepayment based on 30% of what our costs of what the green beans would cost, and that's using the international fair trade price. And sometimes we go a little above that. And Bainbridge Group had a decision at one of their meetings to add 10 cents to that, and they said, "What do you guys think?" And we brought it to the group, and the group was fine with it, and so we upped it a little bit more. So we now pay $2.10 for per pound for green beans. That's another way besides the donations that the community benefits from this whole project, is they're getting that fair trade. I mean, that's the whole point, is it's a fair trade price for their beans rather than selling them for nothing. I mean, it makes them everything more sustainable for them, and they can depend on that for us. We've even had leeway in case of crop failure, and there's been an example of that one year where we still supported them because we know it's something that has to be sustainable over time. So we've been lucky enough to have some of the people directly involved in the project come and visit us here on Ometepe. They come to, the members of OGIFA host them in their homes, and we have then we have a meeting where they come and they speak at our meeting, and they show us pictures, and they talk about directly how the money has affected the work that they do there. They talk about individuals in their projects. They name names. They speak of Fernando or Carlos or Maria, and they talk about where they were at and where they're at now, and the difference that it's made for them, and that's wonderful. And it's great to see the passion of the people who are working with the people who are, you know, organizing the projects and or taking the funding and doing, you know, what they see as the greatest need for the money that they receive, and it all feels good.
Puede cambiar tu fe.